why is there enmity between the French and the British? This is a very, very good question. So this enmity between the French and the British has a history that goes back at least 1,000 years. So it begins with, like I said, the Viking Age, the Viking invasions and raids across Europe. So the Scandinavian Vikings who came from these three countries, Denmark mainly, and also Sweden and Norway, they used to raid regions of Europe south to their countries, which is mainly England, Northern England, and France. So there was this Viking chieftain called Rollo. So Rollo was in the habit of invading and raiding the region of France. So the king of France made a deal with Rollo that you stop invading France. Okay, I'm gonna give you a big piece of territory in northwestern France. You guys can settle here, and you will make your peace with the French. You will desist from trying to conquer Paris, and you will be given this big piece of land, and I will declare you to be a duke. So this, let me show you where this region is in France. This is France. The northwestern region of France is called Normandy. So that is where these guys settled. Rollo was the first duke of Normandy. So he was a Viking. So these guys, these Vikings were called Normans by the French, Northmen. So that's why this region became known as Normandy. And it is these guys so the condition was that they would assimilate into French culture, they would marry French women, they would adopt the French language, and they would become Christians. So that's what happened. So you had a number of dukes of Normandy, and I think this fifth or sixth Duke of Normandy, William, invaded England, and he was the last person to successfully invade and conquer England. So William, the Duke of Normandy, became William the Conqueror after he conquered England and became the King of England. So that is the Norman conquest. It happened in the year 1066. That was the first real instance of hostility between the French and the English, because by that time the Normans had become French. They were completely French by that time. So that's the first instance of hostility and conflict between the French and the English. Before the Normans came into France, basically the people of England and France were quite similar. They both had Celtic roots. But after the Norman invasion, things changed. Then you had something called the 100 Years' War. So the King of England, Edward III, laid claims to France, to regions of France, which led to a war in the 13th and 14th century, in the 14th and 15th centuries. So that war lasted more than 100 years. Then you had the 7 Years' War between these two countries in the 18th century, which also spilled over into India, into the Carnatic Wars. So this was in the 1450s and between the 1740s and 1760s. Robert Clive fought the French in India, and he defeated them. So that's another example of conflict between these two countries. Then you had the American War of Independence, in which the French sided with the revolutionaries who were seeking independence from the British. So that again is a conflict between these two countries. Then you had the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon wanted to invade England, and he fought several battles with the English. So he was greatly opposed to England. He saw them as an adversary nation. So these are some of the instances that show you that the enmity between the English and the French has been constant for almost 1,000 years. So that is the reason for the enmity. So these are examples of enmity between these two countries. The reason for the enmity is that these are two countries that both had aspirations to world domination. They both had very different worldviews, and their aspirations collided, right? And that's why there was this open hostility between these two countries for a very long time. Today, it all remains below the surface, but there is still distrust between the two peoples. The English even today mock the French for being cowards, because they were occupied by the Germans in the Second World War, and they had to be liberated by English-speaking people, mainly Americans, and so on. So that's a short history of the enmity between these two countries. It's because both had great power ambitions, and those ambitions invariably collided repeatedly.